Okay. Shall we give this a few minutes? People are coming in.
I just received the announcement in English with the title Corrigendum. Thank you so much. Now for our translators, interpreters, we have accommodated excess time beyond. So just invoices whatever the excess time will be after. Thank you so much.
It's a question about French translation in the Q&A. Okay, we've hit 100 participants, so maybe that's a good moment to start.
Winnie, go on. Go see Lou.
You're mute now, Sally.
Alberto,
Yes.
could you welcome us?
Yeah, sure. I was waiting for the starting. Okay, here I am.
Starting gun.
Okay, here I am. Dear friends and colleagues, it is a great pleasure to be with you today. I would like to congratulate President Sally Yarkovich and all the members of the Ethics Committee for organizing this crucial webinar on the revision of the ICOM Code of Ethics for Museums. These past 2 years, the entire world has gone through a catastrophe. The COVID-19 emergency has brought on enormous new challenges and exacerbated some of the old ones. I wish to take this opportunity to commend once more the work of all museum professionals who have guaranteed their public service and mission under the most exceptional circumstances. As we slowly emerge from the pandemic, we are now facing the war in Europe. ICOM condemns the Russian invasion and asks for a ceasefire and the respect of the international conventions for the protection of heritage and museums in times of conflict. ICOM sends a powerful message. Museums are committed to build a peaceful and sustainable world. Museums are bridges between peoples and cultures. Museums promote participation and diversity. Museums innovate and experiment to respond to the social, economic, and environmental challenges of our troubled times. ICOM was founded 75 years ago. Facing the disasters and ruins of the World War II, our enlightened founding fathers wanted to promote the social, ethical role of museums and professional practices in museums worldwide. Since 1986, we have a code of ethics for museums that provides guidance, highlights the principles and values of our community, and defines professional standards. The code is a cornerstone for ICOM and the professional community. It is recognized by UNESCO and many national governments as an international reference for the management of museums and heritage and for the work of professionals. The code was last updated in 2004. Now, given all the changes that we are witnessing and have witnessed in recent years, it is appropriate for us to take a look at the code again. I would like to warmly thank all ICOM members for their participation in the many consultations over the last few months, from the update of the museum definition promoted by ICOM Define to the strategic plan 2022-2028, the external governance review, and now the update of the Code of Ethics. I would like to emphasize how much the ICOM members' contribution is valued, especially concerning changes in our organization's governance and the update of our identity documents like the Code of Ethics. The methodology of the code's revision is participatory and transparent and ensures that as many of our members as possible participate in it. We are asking for input from all national and international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations. This webinar will provide feedback through your written and verbal comments. The Code of Ethics for Museums is ICOM's core document. We agree to abide by the code when we become members, and professionals and officials respect its principles, values, and practices all over the world. Please help us create a revised Code of Ethics that will guide us into the future. Today's meeting will certainly be another step in the right direction. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Alberto. Next slide, please. And welcome to this webinar, which kicks off the second consultation concerning the ICOM Code of Ethics for Museums. I am joined today by my colleagues, Shelia Nabi, Luisa de la Peña, Steph Schulten, Linda Knowles, and Kaya Sirach. I will be briefly discussing the role of the Standing Committee on Ethics, the work that has been completed to date on the revision of the code, the methodology we will follow in creating the revision, and how we hope to get your feedback today. After my opening remarks, we'll learn about Mentimeter, the means by which you may give us written feedback during the webinar, and then we'll hear from 6 members of ETHCOM who will seek your input on the issues that are currently not addressed in the code. The ICOM Code of Ethics is a fundamental document, as Alberto said. It defines the standards of principled conduct for museums and museum professionals worldwide. It provides a unifying framework for the profession and guides the field. Shortly after the ICOM Code of Ethics was approved in 1986, the Standing Committee on Ethics, or ETHCOM, was established to monitor the progress of the code on behalf of the Executive Board and to advise the Secretariat, Executive Board, and the entire museum community on all matters related to museum professional ethics. ETHCOM is involved in monitoring the application of the code, recommending changes in the code, as well as advising on ethical issues and creating tools to serve the museum community. Next slide. The debates about the museum definition during the ICOM triennial meeting in Kyoto led ETHCOM to recommend to the Executive Board that it is time to revise the Code of Ethics to express current values important to the field. The urgency of this recommendation has only become clearer each day since that time as we face the impact of the pandemic, challenges to museums' independence, calls for restitution and repatriation, as well as decolonization, challenges to meet our social responsibilities, and now the potential global impact of war. We began the process of revising the code with a first consultation with the ICOM membership early in 2021. This survey yielded a list of issues that need to be addressed more fully in the code. Next. Drawing upon the high-level issues raised in the first survey, ETHCOM is beginning this second consultation in which we will reach out not only to national and international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations, but also to the ICOM membership at large. Following the consultation, an outside consultant will conduct a qualitative analysis of the results, which will be used to shape revision of the code. In Prague, ETHCOM will present a preliminary draft of the revised Code of Ethics to the Executive Board. And we will also conduct a public roundtable discussion of the draft. And finally, ETHCOM members will be available to talk to all ICOM members in the exhibition hall during the course of the meeting. Next. Once the vote on the museum definition has been taken, we will edit the preliminary draft to reflect both the vote and the feedback that we received during the triennial meetings. In the fall of this year, we will conduct a third consultation with the national and international committees, regional alliances, affiliated organizations, and ICOM members. This consultation will help shape the final recommendations that the Standing Committee on Ethics will make to the Executive Board. Next. In the first consultation conducted last year, we received a long list of items to be added, deleted, or changed in the current code. A comprehensive list can be found on the ETHCOM page of ICOM's member space. The issues most often mentioned were sustainability or sustainable development, environmental, social, and financial, the educational role of museums, as well as their independence from political influence, allowing museums to maintain integrity in interpretation and programming. Social responsibility and the social role of museums, collections, documentation, restitution, and repatriation, the ethical implications of new technologies or the digital museum, and finally, ETHCOM heard that we should be developing one comprehensive code of ethics that incorporates the principles from the ICOM Code of Ethics for Natural History Museums. Next. In our second consultation, we are inviting, as we've said, all of the national and international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations, along with their membership, to comment upon and to add to the suggestions that we received in the first survey. We are committed to a democratic and transparent revision process. Next. The consultation is organized like the current Code of Ethics. For each of the 8 principles in the current code, the consultation asks, what is obsolete in the code and needs to be removed? What is there but needs to be changed? And what is currently missing in the Code of Ethics? Next. Today, we will focus on the latter, issues that were raised in the first consultation that are either missing in the code or inadequately addressed. Namely, what are the ethical implications of sustainability, collections documentation, education? Next. The social role of museums, digital museums, and the incorporation of the Natural History Code into the ICOM Code of Ethics. I am joined by 5 of my colleagues working on the revision of the code. Each of us will address one of these issues and then ask for your responses, which you may give orally or through Mentimeter. So first, we will hear more about how to provide feedback through Mentimeter.
Thanks very much, Sally. Hi, everyone. My name is Devin McHugh. I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager at Museums Galleries Scotland, and I've just come along to help facilitate this morning a little bit. As Sally mentioned, we'll be working with an online platform called Mentimeter. And just to give you a little bit of background about Mentimeter, if you haven't worked with it before, it is an entirely anonymous form of feedback that will gather over a number of web-based platforms that you can input into. No one knows that it's you. So if you would like someone to know that it's you, please put some sort of signifier on there. And I know that we have a really vast international audience here. So if you want to make it clear that your perspective is coming from a certain part of the world to the ETHCOM board, please do so. What I will do now is just share a link for you in the chat that if you click on it, it take you into Mentimeter itself. So I'll just give you all a moment to click on that link there. And it should take you to a slide that says, how are you today? It then also tries to say, how are you today in French and in Spanish. I apologize if any of the translations are slightly terrible. We have wonderful translators here to help you, but I am not those translators. My husband and I have done our best using Google Translate this morning and our shared basic knowledge of French and Spanish. But we hope that no one feels any disrespect is given to their native language if we've slightly shiveled things around a little bit. My colleague Neil Ogilvie is here with me, and he will be able to share his screen to show the responses on this. Neil, would you go ahead and share your screen now? Look at that, it's working perfect. That's amazing. One of the great things about using Mentimeter is that it takes all of the administrative burden off of our lovely ETHCOM committee members. No one has to take extensive minutes of everyone's questions, and everyone can add their input in here. What we will do as we're running through this is that Neil will be able to share his screen to show everyone the responses that are coming in. We have such a large audience here, and so widely spread that it should be really, really interesting. So thank you all for doing that. I will stop sharing my screen. Sorry, Neil will stop sharing his screen now. And we should be able to hand back to you, Sally, to introduce the next.
Thank you. So we will now begin the presentations about each of the issues that were identified in the first consultation and that are in one way or another missing in the current Code of Ethics. So we'll start with Steph Schulten on sustainability.
Good day, everybody. Great that you're all here. A large number of you have made it, which is fantastic. We should consider this to be the first exercise almost, but we'll start right away with one of the most pressing issues of our time, which is the question of climate change and the long-term sustainability of our ecology. And the question there, of course, is what the ethical responsibilities are of museums in that field. And when you think about it, it's remarkable that there's actually nothing about climate ecology in the current code. So it goes to show how much worse the situation has gotten in the years since the last time the code was revised. I think that there's a couple of kinds of questions to the ICOM membership about how we, if so, how we should address the question of climate change and sustainability in the Code of Ethics. And I myself, I think I see three areas where we could consider adding to the Code of Ethics. And if I've summed them up very briefly, but you may have other ideas, and please do feel free to either comment in the Mentimeter later on after I finish speaking, or definitely also in the consultation documents that you can find on the ICOM website. So three areas. So the first one is, should museums have an ethical obligation to commit to sustainable practices? So how do we work as organizations? Do we look at our carbon footprint? Is that an obligation for us? Do we practice sustainable processes when we make, for instance, exhibitions? How do we feel about international exchange and loans? What kind of subjects should be in the code that museums should consider on this particular topic? For instance, should we proclaim a net zero target for museums, like many other organizations have done? And of course, and a completely other area is that we have a role as educators of the peoples in the world, and whether or not we should have a formal commitment to teach our audiences about climate change. And on that note, I would suggest that we go into the Mentimeter, that people can make their suggestions, write them in the Mentimeter if when it comes up. Is that where we click again on the link? Is that right? Yes. And then and if you have questions or points, also feel free to speak. And indeed, as said, you can write in any of the ICOM languages. See lots of interesting comments coming up. Yes, I think Adela makes a comment in the chat that is very relevant. The code couldn't specify all actions, and sustainability is not only climate change. And you're absolutely right. For this particular meeting, I suggested we focus on climate change, but there is all the other sustainability development goals from UNESCO as well. So that's a very relevant comment.
Steph, I believe we also have a raised hand or question from Sampatev.
Okay. Is that true? Sampatev, you want to talk?
And I hope I've enabled them to actually be able to speak in this context.
I don't. And Jean-Jacques Ezrati has also raised his hand. Here's a question in the chat that is, of course, about the great concern about the situation in Ukraine, and Alberto has spoken about that briefly. I don't think anybody thinks that we can ignore that in any way. Doesn't mean though that we should not continue to do work on the code of ethics and other ICOM topics that we need to move forward. But of course, it's I think we all feel yeah, we all feel terrible about what is happening in the world right now. Okay. I think I see the writing is now kind of halting. So I think we have quite a rich palette of different opinions and ideas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Steph. And you can continue to put comments into the into Mentimeter as we move forward onto the next subject, which is collections, documentation, restitution, and repatriation. Chedlia.
Bonsoir, donc moi je vais parler de l'éthique documentaire et comment elle peut aider à freiner le trafic illicite des biens culturels. Comme nous le savons tous, la documentation est un travail qui est un travail de base dans tous les musées parce qu'elle est l'essence même de la gestion des collections dont elle assure la sauvegarde et la pérennité. La documentation est soumise, comme nous le savons, tout d'abord à des normes documentaires qui sont reconnues internationalement, telles que la norme ISO qui a été créée par le CIDOC en 2006 et qui a été révisée en 2014. Mais également, cette documentation doit également revenir à des principes déontologiques qui doivent être respectés par les professionnels des musées. Ces principes impactent directement sur les activités du musée, que ce soit au niveau académique et scientifique, mais également, elles réglementent les rapports du musée avec les partenaires institutionnels et sociaux. Pour cela, la documentation doit répondre à au moins 4 principes déontologiques Il y en a d'autres, mais moi, je m'attarderai sur uniquement 4. Tout d'abord, il y a l'éthique scientifique qui assure une honnêteté intellectuelle et exige des informations détaillées, précises, vérifiées et vérifiables. Elle produit des données fiables, authentifiées avec une première mission qui est éducative, comme nous le savons, de diffusion de la connaissance, mais également une mission de transmission d'une information sûre et durable pour les générations à venir. Le second principe éthique est lié aux références des lois à caractère qui engagent d'un point de vue, elles sont tout d'abord, elles engagent, elles sont contractuelles, elles entraînent par leur conformité le respect des lois tout d'abord nationales, l'existence de ce qu'on appelle actuellement dans le code de déontologie, dans le 2.2, le titre de propriété valide, à savoir un document officiel reconnu et paraphé qui en fait un acte, un document officiel, et c'est un document qui constitue une pièce d'identité de l'objet, qui doit être unique pour chaque objet. Le troisième principe est une documentation qui doit être également attentive déontologiquement aux croyances et aux rites particuliers de certaines populations dont nous retrouvons parfois les collections dans nos musées. Ce principe ne doit pas heurter la sensibilité de ces populations sans pour autant diminuer de la valeur des informations que nous donnons. Le quatrième principe éthique est lié au droit international par le respect de toutes les conventions, les traités, les accords, qu'ils soient bilatéraux ou multilatéraux, avec toutes les instances internationales et nos partenaires patrimoniaux. C'est en acceptant et adoptant ces principes déontologiques au niveau de la documentation que le professionnel du musée va s'engager à faciliter le positionnement des collections au niveau scientifique et académique, mais également au niveau des exigences de sécurité et de pérennité des collections. Car une documentation contrôlée déontologiquement facilite la circulation d'une information descriptive, compréhensible surtout de tous, auprès des services qui sont en charge de la sécurité au niveau de la surveillance des frontières, par exemple au niveau de la douane, ou de la répression nationale et internationale, comme nous le savons puisque nous travaillons avec Interpol. Nous savons que ces grandes institutions internationales ne prennent en considération et ne prennent en charge que les dossiers où toutes ces normes documentaires et principes déontologiques sont respectés et appliqués, car ils leur permettent une identification et une localisation précise des collections objets de litige. Cette documentation va donc assurer et garantir une pérennité et la préservation des collections. Elle va participer ainsi à freiner le trafic illicite des biens culturels et par là même évoquer, et ça va être un nouveau principe qui j'espère sera bien documenté au niveau de nouveaux codes, qui est la restitution et le rapatriement de certains objets. Je vous invite maintenant à donner votre avis sur quels sont les principes qu'on peut modifier, ou peut-être certains sont devenus obsolètes, on peut les éliminer, et quels sont les principes qu'on doit, qui n'existent pas actuellement dans le code et qu'on pourrait ajouter. Merci pour votre écoute. Merci. Il y a des questions intéressantes. L'open data pour tout le monde est un processus qui demande beaucoup de niveau d'accès et qui doit être vérifié au niveau des musées, car on ne peut pas donner des informations généralement sur toutes les collections, surtout celles qui ne sont pas encore publiées. Il y a donc des normes et disons, des niveaux d'accès au niveau des informations qu'on peut donner pour les collections. Oui. Oui. La collecte également des musées, la collecte des informations et des objets est un sujet qui est très important et qui doit être particulièrement revu dans le nouveau code de déontologie. Il est très important, je vois une remarque qui dit qu'on ne peut pas faire de fiches par objet, surtout dans les séries archéologiques. Il est très important de le faire. Par contre, il faut faire cela par des campagnes d'étudiants qu'on peut mobiliser pour ce genre d'objets, parce que comme nous le savons, les objets même, les objets d'archéologie qui sont fabriqués en série sortant d'un même moule peuvent changer d'un objet à un autre au cours des siècles. Il peut y avoir des cassures, il peut y avoir l'empreinte du temps qui change un objet d'un autre objet, qui change sa physionomie et qui va nous permettre, c'est à ce niveau-là qu'on peut aider pour la lutte contre le trafic illicite, parce que même si deux objets sortent d'un même moule, au bout d'une centaine ou 200 ans, leur aspect et leur physionomie externe va énormément changer. C'est ça ce qui est important. On peut le faire, on l'a fait dans plusieurs musées. C'est vrai que c'est difficile, il faut pour cela mobiliser des équipes de jeunes chercheurs, des stagiaires, faire des campagnes pour pouvoir, disons, gérer toutes ces collections. C'est vrai que c'est très compliqué. Bien sûr, il y a toujours des fouilles clandestines, qu'elles soient dans les pays sous-développés ou ailleurs, mais il y a également des institutions et de répression qui veillent. On ne peut pas tout surveiller, mais c'est une possibilité qui peut se faire. Il y a des brigades du patrimoine qui existent dans certains pays et qui aident à lutter contre ce genre de fouilles anarchiques et clandestines. Tout à fait. C'est pour ça qu'il y a ce qu'on appelle le recollement dans les inventaires de musées, c'est-à-dire qu'au bout, chaque musée détermine son rythme. Au bout de 5 années, on fait un recollement pour pouvoir, si les collections ont changé, si un objet a été détérioré, qu'il nécessite une nouvelle restauration. Il y a des musées qui font un recollement au bout de 5 ans, il y en a d'autres au bout de 10 ans. C'est vrai que c'est un travail très fastidieux, mais il est très nécessaire de le faire, effectivement. Merci, merci pour toutes ces questions qui sont vraiment très intéressantes. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Chedlea. for your presentation about collections. This is wonderful feedback for us, and we look forward to looking at it closely as we revise the Code of Ethics. The next topic is the fact that museums educate, and it perhaps goes without saying that museums are important places for education. But when you look closely at the current Code of Ethics, you find no mention of education specifically. The code, it is implied rather than stated in the code. The code says that the museums hold collections in trust for the benefit of society and its development, that the collections are primary evidence that establish and further knowledge, and that they provide opportunities for the appreciation and understanding and managing of the natural and cultural heritage. But there's no real direct mention of education. So the question is, what are the ethical obligations of museums regarding education, and how should they be included in the code? To me, one of the important aspects of educating in a museum is the independence of museums, allowing museums to maintain integrity in interpretation and in their programming, and allowing them to do so without influence from particular interest groups, lenders, donors, or funders. It's important that museums maintain their integrity and maintain the trust in the public that what they present is the best possible thing that they can present. In UNESCO's 2015 recommendation on the protection and promotion of museums, UNESCO recognizes education as a primary function of museums, along with preservation, research, and communication. It seems only fitting that in the Code of Ethics, in the revised Code of Ethics, that ICOM does the same. And with that, I would welcome your comments regarding education and the aspects of education that should be included in the Code of Ethics. Yeah. Yes, it's important, I think, that the issues of access and equity are very important in dealing with education, and making sure that everyone can have access to the programs and exhibitions at museums. And the collective engagement of the public is also an issue that has come up and has become more urgent in the current times. Again, we need to find a place in the Code of Ethics that encourages participation. Someone has mentioned the need to link the new definition of museums with the Code of Ethics, and we intend to do that. We will not complete or finalize anything in the code until after the definition is voted upon in Prague. And once we know the new definition, we will revise the code to reflect that, both in the subjects that the definition promotes, as well as in the priorities that it establishes. Yes, someone brings up the very important point that the education in museums should involve local and indigenous knowledge. This again is a concern that has arisen more and more in recent times and will help shape the museum of the future. Someone has mentioned that several of the definitions do not include the word education, and that does not mean that we won't include education in the Code of Ethics. Because I think we recognize that the role of museums as educators is really critical to what we are and to how we are perceived by the public. Again, thank you for all of your comments. They will give us much meat to chew on in our as we begin to revise the Code of Ethics. So they're excellent. Several of the comments have mentioned museums needing to be aware of the world beyond their walls. And that leads us very easily into our next presentation by Luisa de la Peña about the social role of museums in the 21st century. Luisa?
Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches a todos. Mi presentación sobre el rol social de los museos en el siglo XXI la inicio con una frase: los museos no son neutrales. Entonces, eso es parte de lo que es la responsabilidad social de un museo. El museo como institución, espacios que sirven a la sociedad. El museo existe para las personas, para preservar el patrimonio, pero existe para las personas. Entonces, al examinar el código de ética, vemos que está implícito en varios de los principios del desarrollo de varios de los principios el rol social de los museos, pero no se trata directamente como tal, y es una faceta del código de ética que es importante explorar. Cómo el museo desde el punto de vista ético asume problemas y situaciones que afectan a la comunidad inmediata a la que sirven o a la comunidad en general. Cómo los museos deben ser espacios seguros, donde la inclusión, el respeto a la diversidad sean una práctica normal, donde esté ese espacio abierto a todo. Entonces, definitivamente sería importante el abordar estos aspectos dentro del código de ética, hasta donde la responsabilidad de los museos impulsa la promoción de valores, pero también se involucra en lo que son los procesos educativos no formales, fuera del aula, la responsabilidad social del museo, el rol social de los museos en el siglo XXI, íntimamente ligado a la educación, pero también se sostiene sobre la base de la inclusión y de la transparencia y de la apertura. Esos aspectos no se tocan directamente dentro del código. Entonces, sí nos gustaría escuchar las ideas que ustedes, toda la membresía puede. El rol social que deben jugar los museos en el siglo XXI, siempre considerando no son neutrales. Los museos toman posición cuando deciden exponer o no exponer algo. Los museos deben crear programas donde se aborden situaciones en general. Pues nos gustaría ahora pasar a todo lo que es la parte del Mentimeter y también de... hay muchas preguntas se han puesto en el chat y también en el espacio de preguntas y respuestas sobre el código de ética. ¿Qué falta? Debe ser abordado el rol social de los museos desde un punto de vista ético. ¿Cuáles son las responsabilidades que debemos nosotros asumir como museos o como profesionales de museos desde el punto de vista ético, para tal y como estamos definidos y que al parecer no está fuera de ninguna de las definiciones de museo, es que el museo es una institución al servicio de la sociedad. Gracias. Hay un comentario interesante sobre que los museos no son neutrales, pero deben estar siempre atentos para que no sean usados en agendas políticas a través de el financiamiento, más que de las consideraciones éticas. Efectivamente, cuando decimos que el museo no es neutral, es porque el museo define una política en relación a temas específicos. Y el no abordar temas es parte también de esa política. O sea, que no es neutralidad, sino es una política. Dentro de esa política que el museo define, hasta dónde involucra su rol social, asume un rol y una responsabilidad social en relación a las comunidades, naturalmente. Muchos comentarios interesantes. Muchas gracias. Que va muy rápido. Un comentario interesante: igualdad, diversidad e inclusión, tanto en el staff del museo como en las audiencias. Efectivamente, el museo no puede promover en sus audiencias igualdad, diversidad e inclusión si no aplica esa política internamente. Y eso es una responsabilidad social que tiene el museo, ser un ejemplo como institución. Efectivamente, los museos no son neutrales, es una frase mercantil, vamos a decir. Y precisamente el desarrollo de un principio en ese orden debe especificar, y es lo que le preguntamos a todos los miembros, que debe especificar un principio como ese, desde el punto de vista ético. Precisamente eso es lo que debemos desarrollar. Por supuesto, el comentario sobre la unificación del lenguaje es parte de lo que debe ser la política de inclusión de un museo. Es algo que definitivamente debe ser tomado en cuenta al desarrollar un principio como el rol social de los museos. Un comentario sobre que el museo no debe ser político para el uso o promoción de agendas políticas. Bueno, toda acción humana tiene una faceta política, porque toda acción humana es acorde a el pensamiento individual de cada persona y de eso no se exime ninguna institución. Lo que debe el museo y el código de ética definir es cuál es el límite de la influencia política o de la posición política de un museo, pero ninguna acción humana está exenta de la práctica política, porque es parte del pensamiento humano. Cuando nosotros emprendemos acciones, las emprendemos de acuerdo a nuestro pensamiento, nuestra concepción política. Entonces, no es real el pensar en neutralidad. Eso es una fantasía. Nada es neutral. Todo el mundo y todas las prácticas tienen posiciones. Hasta no asumir una posición es una posición en sí. No es neutralidad. Justicia social y antirracismo. Por supuesto, el promover valores como la no discriminación debe ser una responsabilidad social de los museos. ¿Qué dicen los miembros al respecto? Un comentario interesante. El museo debe ser apolítico y neutral en presentar las historias a todos. Y posiblemente la no interferencia desde el gobierno. Eso no es realmente ser apolítico, sino ser en caso de regímenes democráticos apartidistas. Pero definitivamente si el museo asume una política de promoción de valores, de promoción de inclusión, de la no discriminación, de igualdad, esos son principios políticos. Lo que es que no se aplica en lo que es el espacio del hacer política, que es una diferencia que debemos definir en un código de ética. El museo no debe hacer política, pero sí debe tener posiciones, o sea, no debe tener, tiene posiciones políticas en un sentido o en otro. Exacto. Precisamente, hay un comentario en el chat sobre cómo proteger a los museos. Eso es exactamente el porqué de la pregunta y la propuesta de abordar el rol social de los museos dentro del código de ética. El código de ética per se es una herramienta que en principio debe servir para proteger a los museos y la práctica de los museos. Naturalmente, el código de ética del ICOM no es vinculante para ninguna institución. Es política de la institución asumirla o no, asumir el código de ética y la práctica ética en un museo.
Clearly, the social role of museums is an important topic that needs to be discussed in the Code of Ethics. And Louisa, thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you everyone
Thank you.
for all of your wonderful comments. You've given us much to think about. Recently, especially recently during the pandemic, museums have exploded into the virtual space. But even before that, the role of museums in working with digital materials has become much more important. And Kaya Sirok is going to address next the Digital Museum.
Thank you, Sally. And thank you for this very interesting talk. I will go a step further of what we were already discussing with Louisa, with the social role of museums. So the social role of museums going into the digital. Is this enough to write a new chapter of the code? So we heard about the several chapters and how important they are, and the most important topics were already addressed today. But we can all agree that in 2020 and 2021, there will be a really challenging years for culture. So we have been subject to the same global problems, but at the same time, in order to remain relevant, it was crucial for us to find innovative ways how to reach the public. So we were forced to adapt, we were forced to be much more flexible and to look for new ways of how to communicate to stay relevant for society. In a certain way, culture was never been so virtually accessible and at the same time so physically fragile. The pandemic, in a certain way, accelerated the digital transformation. But however, all around the globe, museums were not able to respond quickly. Digitalization is still perceived as something necessary, a necessary evil for some employees, and many have problems in understanding its scope and implementation. I would say that digitalization is really a huge topic. Maybe in some generations, we'll have a code on its own. But what we need to discuss right now when we are rewriting certain parts of the code is it important enough to be a part of the new code? So how can we museums be competitive in the field of digitalization, and to what extent the individual countries take culture or cultural production into account into digital transformation of society? And do we employees have enough knowledge on the topic? And how shall we carry out the intergenerational knowledge transfer? Are we aware of a tremendous impact that our posts, especially on social media, can have when they go viral? We can all agree that our professional work is moving into digital space and becoming part of the so-called digital strategies. Some museums already adopt them, some are writing them, some are really discussing still them. But we know for sure that we have to develop a new innovative way of how to address audience and to play this engagement, especially on digital platforms. And we also need them to educate and to educate better, because this is a part of the future of museums. So can we work on digital transformations and be digital without compromising our ethics? Is this topic important enough to get space from a statement to a chapter in the revisited code? I believe that one of the biggest struggles in the digital era for us will be the fight against the fake news and historical distortion. This will go probably much more for the historical museums, but nonetheless, this is something that we are already experiencing. Preserving the truth, doing a professional work before posting, showing, publishing on web needs to be a priority when we are discussing the new guidelines. Let us just for a minute discuss the role of social media. In some circumstances, inappropriate use of social media can lead to possibilities of violating what we consider to be part of our ethical, the core of ethics. Examples of violations should include, let's say, posting photos of people or groups, especially the vulnerable one, without permission, or misinterpreting research that justify an individual of a, let's say, national understanding of a certain event or topic. Objects that may not match the general opinion when they are showed on Facebook, on Twitter. Also including comments in posts and even hate speech sometimes can may accompany posts. So the question is always how we are using this information and how to avoid conflict, what to show, what not to show. Many museums are also, and this is maybe also seen as a problem, using opinion makers or influencers to get more visibility. So is this an ethical way? And for that sense, the basic principle to keep in mind is also that opinions are not knowledge. Opinions are what someone is thinking, and ask yourself on what that is based and why people argue much more on certain topics. And opinion is subjective, and it's not possible to beat knowledge out of it. But on the other side, museums, and we were already discussing about our social role, about the educational role, we museums present important messages to the audience. We know that our communities find museums trustworthy. People trust in us and they rely on our posts and important messages. And this touches really the core of our ethics. So where we are going and where is the future when we are discussing the topics of digital. Thank you very much. So while we are waiting, if you want, you can also share your own ideas of how to start to discuss this topic, or is this just a sentence, or we need a chapter? What should be included? Well, I think it's relevant, the question of is digital object still an object? And if museum that exists only in a virtual space or a museum, yeah, that's the next step. It's something that really, as I said, maybe in 2 generations is going to have a code on its own, but we are moving there, and we are really moving there very fast, and we should discuss it. Because in the last period of the pandemic, many virtual museums started to pop up, and we even don't know who opened them, what kind of relations they have to our professionalism. So yeah, they are relevant questions. And as you can see from the posts, there are so many different ways of how we are touching the topic of digitalization and digital. This is not the same. So digitalization and discussing the digital in museums, and especially also in the environment themselves, it's not the same. And even the work that it's done at the museums when discussing the museums of the future, or the digital museum, can have many different layers also connected to the professional work done within several jobs in the museum. Of course, digitalization is much more connected to documentalization, but this is overall not the role when we are discussing what digitally means for the future. access to collection, yeah, this is also a part of digitalization and becoming digital, and it's a very important one. I was much more discussing the appearance on the social media, but this is just one of the topics that we need to discuss when discussing the digital museum. Yeah, and I agree with the digital functions should be differentiated from the digital heritage. Yeah, it's really a topic which is evolving in so many ways. And even when we are discussing it on a governmental level, or when we are discussing it on a professional level, there are really so many layers, and there are so many ways of discussing it. So, as I said, I think that it's really becoming one of the very important issues in how to understand the evolving of the field of museology. I'm not saying at the same time that what we were doing till now will not be relevant, but because of the COVID situation and because of each of our countries becoming more and more digitalized or becoming digitally much more accessible, museums should also be within the sector of culture and with other sectors, not the culture itself, one step further and start to discussing it with their audience already now, and not to wait a generation. Yeah, I'm trying to follow all your comments, and I think that they're all relevant, and we will later discuss it. Yeah, that's an important remark. We will probably need new professionals in the museums in order to face the challenges of the digital museum and the digitalization of the documentation. Okay, there are so many that I cannot follow all of them, but thank you very much. Sally, I think that we are okay here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaya. And thank you again to everyone who left comments in Mentimeter. There will be, as we've said before, they will be enormously helpful as we begin to revise the Code of Ethics. In our first consultation, we heard from the membership that they would like to have one Code of Ethics for ICOM rather than two. The ICOM Code of Ethics for Natural History Museums was created because in part because the last Code of Ethics did not address some of the issues that were important to natural history museums. Today, Linda Knowles will talk to us about the issues that natural history might present for our next revision of the Code of Ethics. Linda?
Thank you, Sally, and thank you to everyone for this wonderful opportunity. I think out of COVID, this ability to speak with everyone in the museum community, regardless of where they work and live, is one of the great benefits that has come out of the pandemic. And it is so refreshing for me to be able to participate in these activities where I can hear and see from so many different people with so many different perspectives. I think it's a huge strength for ICOM in general. And just to give you a little bit of context with the Code of Ethics for the ICOM NatHist, there are a lot of people here on the call today who were far more involved in the creation of this code than I was. And we would very much like to see and hear your opinions and thoughts on this. Essentially, the ICOM NatHist Code of Ethics was developed after the current version of the overall Code of Ethics. And it was, it addresses certain specific areas in more detail, or in more detail than the main or primary code. The first one of these is ethics regarding the display of human remains. And in a precursor, I think, to some of the conversations we're now having about decolonization, the NatHist Code of Ethics discussed the need for a duty of care when it came to the display of human remains, and a duty to consult with indigenous groups or other extant cultural members from which these sorts of collections may have been derived. It also discusses in broad detail the concept of repatriation of human remains, and standards surrounding that as well, compliance with legal treaties or legislation regarding the return of human remains, and also encouraging a very thoughtful consideration of how to do it and whether to do it and why to do it. And I think this was very important to ICOM NatHist because, unlike perhaps some other museum collections, as repositories of colonial material, particularly older natural history museums, they had these human remains that obviously required very different treatment from other sorts of objects. However, the ICOM NatHist Code also dealt with objects of sacred significance. And again, I think this appears in the ICOM, the main Code of Ethics, but NatHist got a little bit deeper in terms of paying attention to these issues and taking into consideration the thoughts and wishes of the communities from which these resources were obtained. The ICOM NatHist Code of Ethics also talks about biological specimens, the provenance of biological specimens, compliance with international and national laws regarding the use of fossils, gems, minerals, as well as plant and animal specimens too. So it was felt that there were these very specific sorts of things that needed to be discussed in further detail, and it was done in a separate code of ethics. So in terms of making or including these materials or these areas into the new code of ethics, that's something that we would be very interested in hearing from you about, and also hearing from you about these concepts of repatriation and or restitution of not just human remains, but other objects, and the extent to which that can or should be addressed in a code of ethics. And with that, I will leave off and let's start the comments. Again, it's been wonderful to hear from so many different people on this. And I'm just so grateful to be here and so grateful to be with you all. I see a good comment in the chat that the Code of Ethics should mention that specimens related to a country cannot be exhibited in another country, and talking about a human remains or a skeleton that is found in one country and exhibited in another. And I think that's a good comment. It kind of goes to this to the provenance of some of these artifacts and specimens and remains, what that provenance is, and how you fix or create ethical boundaries around what museums are doing in light of the sensitivity of some of these specimens. Some very good points being raised here in terms of one museum community, one code of ethics, and perhaps having sections in the revised code that deal specifically with natural history. And then here's another viewpoint, well-spoken. I think integrating the two will complicate the content. Even if it looks redundant, we should keep Nat Hist ethics separate. Another comment on the separation of Indigenous communities and their material culture into natural history is no longer acceptable, is it? I think that is a really fertile ground, and I would imagine that different natural history museums have different opinions about that, but certainly the development of ethical standards regarding incorporation of these communities into discussions of these items in museums is paramount, and you can't really not do it. Oh, an appendix. I'm not sure if that references, having an appendix to the code for natural history museums. That's a good idea. It also reminds me that there is a appendix to the ICOM Nat Hist Code of Ethics on standards of care and for taxidermy. There's a lot of good commentary too about, well, if we have a separate code for natural history, then aren't we going to have separate codes for all of these other types of museums as well? And I do think, you want to be very careful about having too many codes of ethics with too many opportunities for differences in interpretation and differences in application. And it might be possible perhaps to construct a master code of ethics, if you will, that can talk about some of these discipline-specific ethics. And again, your comments and your input into this area will be very, very helpful for us as we grapple with a lot of these issues. I think one of the overarching principles that might be important to adopt in a master code is this idea today about the intersection between museum treatment of indigenous collections and human rights, and how those things are overlapping now more than they ever did when this code was first drafted. Yeah, there's definitely a link or connection between climate change and endangered species and how those are handled in museum collections. Absolutely. Agreed. These are very good comments. If I'm reading my French right, and someone please jump in to correct me, the question of restitution isn't just about natural history museums, it's about all of us. Some discussion about making sure that you publicize the list of objects you're going to be exhibiting, so that if there's anything sensitive, there can be an opportunity for discussion. I know that happens a lot here in the Western United States when there are exhibitions in terms of how they are displayed, what is said about them, and who speaks to the meaning of those objects. And yeah, I think the idea of discussing this issue beyond simply human remains is something that is, I think I see that being developed just in practical experience amongst and between these communities as they interact with museums. It's about more than human remains. And Sally, I don't know if we're out of time, but I give it back over to you. And again, thank you so much to everyone.
And thank you, Linda. This has really been, again, a wonderful opportunity for us to gather suggestions and ideas that we will definitely be considering much more seriously as we move forward with the revision of the Code of Ethics. I wanted to thank you for your participation this morning, and also for your patience with our technological glitches at the beginning of the webinar. We hope that you found this introduction useful and look forward to hearing more from you. In the coming weeks, ETHCOM will hold regional webinars, during which time you will have an opportunity to discuss the ethical issues that are important for your region. We want to get as broad a participation in this process as possible so that the revised Code of Ethics will provide guidance on the issues that the ICOM membership thinks are important now, as well as in the coming years. There you can find more information about the second consultation on the in the ETHCOM page on MemberSpace. The link is on the screen now. You can also continue to talk to us and to give us your feedback, not just on the issues that we've raised today, but on other issues related to the code by sending us an email to ethics@icom.museum. We need to all work together to ensure that the Code of Ethics for Museum expresses the values and ethical principles that underpin our professionalism so that we can maintain the public trust and continue to be vital organizations for all. Our goal is to ensure that we communicate as openly and transparently with the ICOM membership as possible during this revision, so that all voices will be heard and that the ICOM members will feel that the new Code of Ethics reflects their current concerns and challenges. I'd like to thank specifically my colleagues who participated in this webinar, and to all of the people who participated through listening and through giving us your very valuable comments. We look forward to continuing to hear from you. The consultation will extend into April. We'll publish a date on the ICOM website and keep you all posted on how we're doing with the revision. Thank you for your participation and contributions. I should also add that the webinar will be available, a recording of the webinar will be available on the ICOM website.